Hello, people. My name is Gus Fortman, and today we're going to be doing Rip a Pack. But if I get Tim Raines, the video ends. Let's start off with this first pack. I have a good feeling about this one. Click on it. First card is Bill Castro. Card is what? Enos Cabell. Oh, Lee Lacy. Okay. Ozzie Smith. That's a pretty good card. Kent Colvey. Denny Darwin. Bob Boone. Bill Fahey. Mickey Klutz, and then finally Eddie Solomon. Wait, no, there's still more. Willie Hernandez, Dave Stapleton, Larry Isle. Oh my God, we have just pulled two of the same card, back to back. Larry Isle, if that's how you pronounce his name. Jerry Martin. I'm pretty sure he was traded with Jesus Figueroa. Steve Garvey, Rick Monday, Joaquin Andujar, and the Gum. Now, okay. Let's go back. Another pack. Gene Richards. Another Bill Castro. That's the second one we've pulled. Steve McCaddy. Another Bill Fahey. This doesn't seem very random. Jeff Zahn, misspelled. It's actually Geoff. Ron Reed, he used to play basketball. John Wathen. If you have ever watched Jab's Family, you know this card really well. Ron Jackson. Glenn Abbott. Charlie LeBrant. Gary Lucas. Roger Erickson. Jim Tracy. Daryl Porter. Another Larry Isle card. Yet another Larry Isle card. Gary Alexander. Rick Langford. Oh, Dennis Martinez. He was a Hall of Famer. And the Gum. This is going to be pack number 3. First card is Jim Catt. Then Steve McCaddy. Tom Seaver, 2 Hall of Famers and 3 cards. John Matlow. Oh my God, that is a perfect picture. Matt Keo? Dickie Knowles. I think that's a rookie card, right? Yeah, that's a rookie card. Jerry Augustine. Larry Boa. Paul Spitorf. Ray Knight. He forgot what he did in the 86 World Series. Fred Norman. Mookie Wilson drove in the game-winning RBI. Or was he the game-winning RBI? No, Ray Knight was the game-winning RBI, right? Paul Mitchell. George Foster, he hit 48 home runs, right? No, 52 in 1977. Lou Whitaker, he should be a Hall of Famer. Steve Macko. Rest in peace. Then just the checklist. Dave Kingman. And Gum. Now on to pack 4. So far, we have not gotten a single Expo, let alone a Tim Raines rookie. Joe A. Malfitano. John Lowenstein. John Matlack again. Dave Smith. Rich Dower. Jim Essien. Dale Berra. That looks like a coach card. Dallas Green. That's a manager card. Dusty Baker. Coaches the Astros. Bob Piccolo error card. His real name is Rob. Bobby Mercer. Chris Chambliss. Len Sakata. Steve Garvey. Dan Graham. Rick Mill. Oh my God, that doesn't have a number or a name. Fred Stanley, the last Seattle pilot in the MLB. Joe Lefebvre. Sorry if I botched the names. I'm sorry. Danny Darwin, Ron Hassey, Vern Rule, Jim Morrison, Reggie Smith, Moose Haas, Glenn Hubbard, Rick Langford, Dan Petrie, Danny Goodwin, Brian Asselstein, Eric Rasmussen, Lou Piniella, that's a good card, Larry Boa, Bob Piccolo, no, that's a corrected Rob Piccolo, Mookie Wilson, Steve Renko, John Lowenstein, and the Gum. What is this, 5 or 6? I'm going to go with 6. Bob Horner, Larry Milbourne, Bobby Maddock, Dick Tidrow, Bobby Cox, Vida Blue, Richie Hebner, Jerry Augustine, Andre Thornton, Bert Campaneris, Al Oliver, Dane Iorg, Butch Weiniger, Silvio Martinez, Benny Ayala, Damaso Garcia, Pete Redfern, Dickie Thon, and that's it. Jim Bibby, Mike Schmidt MVP, Ivan DeJesus, Ted Cox, Roy Howell, Joel Youngblood, Bob Shirley, Steve Kemp, he looks really mad in that picture, Phil Garner, Bert Blyleven, back-to-back Pirates, Tom Bergmeyer, Eddie Solomon, 3 Pirates and 4 cards, Joe Niekro, brother of Phil Niekro, Lee Lacy, oh my God, that's another Pirate, Barry Foote, Dwayne Kuiper, only hit 1 home run, Woody Fryman, he used to work on a farm before he made it to the MLB, Butch Hobson, and Gum. Pack number 8, I think. Cecil Cooper, Benny Ayala, Preston Hanna, Len Sakata, Steve Nisosha, Wayne Gross, Roy Smalley, Checklist. I hate checklists. I don't know about you, but I really don't like them. Leon Durham, Steve Garvey, Randy Moffett, Manny Sanguilin, Eric Soderholm, Mike Scott, Tom Hossman, Del Unser, J.R. Richard, Lamar Hoyt, and Hold on, I gotta pretend to eat it. This is our 10th pack. Got Mike Sadek, Bruce Bochy, manager of the manager. I think that's Ken Griffey, not Ken Griffey Jr. Stan Poppy, Chet Lemon, Rick Cerrone, Steve Rogers. That's an error. His name is spelled Rogers, not Rogers, like Aaron Rodgers. Pete Vukovich. That's actually a pitcher, believe it or not. Terry Kennedy, another Cardinal. Nelson Norman, nice name. Silvio Martinez, another Cardinal. Bombo Rivera, a great name. Johnny Bench, Hall of Fame catcher. Jim Palmer, Hall of Fame pitcher. Tim Stoddard, definitely not in the Hall of Fame, but he is on the Orioles. Manny Trio, again, definitely not in the Hall of Fame. Steve Rogers, but this time it's the actual print. That's weird. We got a misprint of Steve Rogers and a regular Steve. Paul Mirabella and Gum. Okay, Dennis Lamp, Shane Raleigh, Bob Forsch, Lenny Randall, Rob Piccolo Error, Butch Hobson, Len Barker, Rick Waits, Bill Gullickson, Anos Campbell, Len Cicada, Ferguson Jenkins. Oh, Fergie Jenkins. Milt May, John Tudor, Bill Stein, Reggie Cleveland. I've actually never heard of him. Daryl Evans, Larry Parrish, and Gum. Bob Pate. Oh man, that looks exactly like Tim Raines. Scott Thompson, Ricky Peters, Dennis Martinez, John Wathan. Okay, if you haven't seen the Tim Raines rookie card, it looks exactly like this, except yeah, it looks extremely similar. Like you're gonna get this one confused with the Tim Raines one. Ricky Peters, Dennis Martinez, Hall of Famer, John Wathan, Reggie Jackson, two Hall of Famers in three cards. Reggie Smith, Jose Morales, Jack Morris, another Hall of Famer, Robin Yount, another Hall of Famer, Ron LaFleur, Rodney Craig, Alan Ashby, Larry Sorensen, Dale Berra, Joe Torre, I think he's a Hall of Famer, Steve Garvey, Mark Belanger, and Gum. Oh man, I got really excited, but it's like Doug Capella, Yogi Berra, he's in the Hall of Fame, Milt May, Steve McCaddy, Dickie Knowles, Del Unser, Rob Piccolo, Ron Reed, Mark Clear, Cecil Cooper, Benny Ayala, Brian Downing, Rich Gossage, Gene Richards, Jesus Figueroa, Don Sutton, another Hall of Famer, Willie Norwood, Tom Bergmeyer, and Gum. Now let's move on to the next pack. We have Mike Cubbage, Jerry Dubzinski, Rick Camp, Len Cicada, Greg Minton, Damaso Garcia, Bill North, Pete Rose. No, I thought he was a Hall of Famer. Dusty Baker, Tim Foley, Jim Slayton, Steve Rinko, Dave Cash, Mark Wagner, Davey Lopes, Dwayne Murphy, Bob Shirley, Jerry Martin, and that was a stinker of a pack. Joe Strain, Carlton Fisk, he's a Hall of Famer. Junior Kennedy, Alfredo Martinez, Gary Lucas, Rafael Landestoy, Rick Bazzetti, Marty Patton, Ben Ogilvy, Earl Weaver, Dennis Kinney. I've never seen that card before. Huh. Dave Smith, Mike Vale, Larry Gura, Ken Singleton, Bob Davis, Susan. Oh my god, that's a basic name. Bob Davis, John Tamargo, and a stick of gum. Roy Jackson, Pete Rose, Dave Revering, Willie Randolph, John Mayberry, Doc Medic, Tom Bergmeyer, Tommy Hutton, Mick Keller, Yogi Berra, Hall of Famer, Richie Zisk, Phil Garner, Benny Ayala. I keep getting Benny Ayala. Jim Ganter, Mike Schmidt, Butch Hobson, Butch Winiger, and that's the end. And I feel like I'm pulling the same exact cards. Okay, well, it looks like I accidentally ended. Let's go back a little bit. Yeah, where were we? Oh, Paul Molitor, a Hall of Famer, Eric Rasmussen, Bobby Bonds, Dale Berra, Greg Minton, Bill Cottle, Gene Michael, Billy Norwood, Ron Say, Larry Gura, Brian Kingman, Harry Spillman. So I'm starting to lose. Starting to lose it. I've been opening digital packs for about 20 minutes. I'm not even going to comment unless we get a Hall of Famer a card that I've never seen before. Oh, I actually have that card. Dave Ford. What is that haircut, man? Luis Pujols. What? No, that's an error card. It's Pujols. Moose Haas. George Orta. Jorge. Oh man, I messed that up. Craig Reynolds. Gorman Thomas. Steve Dillard. Bill Buckner. Rennie Martin. A checklist. Dave Frost. John Walkenfuss. Bump Willis. Paul Spidorf. Terry Crowley. Elliot Maddox. Glenn Adams, and a stick of gum. Dave Rosello, Butch Winnegar, Rich Gale, Jackson Todd, Jerry White, Buck Martinez, Jesus Figueroa, Al Bumbry, Tom Donahue, Hugh, Dave Roberts, Bob Horner, Jim Beattie, Larry Bradford, Jerry Royce, Glenn Borgman, Buck Martinez error, Tom Paciorek, John Tamargo, and a stick of gum. Bill North, Win Rimmersall, Bobby Clark, Mario Soto, Jerry Garvin, Dave Roberts, Frank Tanana, Ed Whitson, Glenn Abbott, Mike Phillips, Jim Beattie, Craig Swan, Ray Knight, Dave Frost, Roy Howell, Carlos Lescano, Mike Edwards, Daryl Thomas, and that is it. Luis Gomez, Rich Gale, Reggie Jackson, Phil Gardner, Mike Phillips, Kiko Garcia, Bob Shirley, Richie Zisk, Vern Rule, Earl Weaver, John Ellis, Larry Bradford, Dwayne Murphy, Darrell Evans, Grant Jackson, Bob Forsch, Pete Vukovich. Oh, man, I'm getting so much Cardinals, Padres, and Brewers. Al Cohen's. Have I gotten a yeah, I feel like I haven't gotten a what was it? I don't think I've gotten a Dodger other than Tom Sutton and Daryl Thomas. Tony Scott, Rick Waits, Pat Putnam, Tom Bergmeyer, Mickey Hatch. Oh, there's a Dodger. Ron Hassey. Mike Schmidt MVP. Steve Nikosha. Yeah, I just feel like oh my god, I'm keep getting oh man, he's staring at me weirdly. Ken Forsch, Stan Bonds or Banson, Bill North, Joaquin Andujar, Bill Castro, Fergie Jenkins, Toby Hurrah, Doyle Alexander, John Mayberry, and a stick of gum. This is officially becoming boring. Lou Whitaker, Bob Horner, Ed Ott, Don Baylor, Rick Manning, Rich Gale, Joe Rudy, Carney Lansford, Carly Yastrzemski, Denny Walling, Larry Cox, Ray Burris, Jeff Cox, Dave Roberts, Lenny Randall, Ken Tokove, Jerry Martin, and a stick of gum. We're not doing too well. Dan Dreesian, Dick Williams, Ken Tokove, Jim Dwyer, Sal Butera, Leo Sutherland, Bob Watson, Jeff Newman, Todd Baylor, John Lowenstein, Rob Wilfung, Jim Kern, Bob Walk, Burnt Campaneris, Danny Darwin, Caesar Sedano, Bill Russell, Mike Jorgensen, and a stick of gum. We might be here for hours. Pete Falcone, Terry Pule, Rich Dower, John Mayberry, Bobby Castillo, Pete Rose, Keith Hernandez, Bill Buckner, Dave Edwards, Rick Sofield, Caesar Cedeno, Mike Ivy, Moose Haas, Tim Stoddard, Bruce Benedict, Champ Summers, Dan Meyer, Andy Hassler, and a stick of gum. Bob Baylor, Luis Tiant, Larry Bittner, Ron Guidry, Scott McGregor, Eddie Murray, Steve Mura, Lamar Johnson, Cy Young, Steve Stone, Rennie Martin, Roland Office, Mark Little. It's kind of like a manager in that picture. Dennis Littlejohn, definitely Irish. Sixto Lozcano, Dave Winfield, Hall of Famer. Matt, Jim Ganter, Mickey Rivers, and a stick of gum. Tony Armas, Dave Roberts, Dave Collins, Tony La Russa, Lee Lacy, Enrique Romo, back-to-back Pirates, Joe Amafiltiano, Paul Spidorf, Doc Medic, Doyle Alexander, Steve Carlton, Hall of Famer, Red Shoeinist, Vern Rule, Rich Gale, Doug Bear, Mike Edwards, Pat Kelly, Glenn Borgman, and a stick of gum. John Tamargo, MVP George Brett, that's a Hall of Famer. Marcus Foley, Gary Alexander, Jim Fregosi, Tom Griffin, Tony Bernazard, Lance Parrish, John Verhoeven, Steve Henderson, Mike Cubbage, Mike Sadek, Dave Rader, Matt Keogh, Dallas Green, Ron Hassey, Thad Bosley, George Kendrick, and a stick of gum. One more pack. Rick Langford, Bruce Benedict, Bob Rogers, Bob Davis, John Fulgham, Britt Burns, Dennis Martinez, Jeff Zahn, Bill Buckner, Gene Garber, Greg Minton, Ted Cox, Mickey Klutz, Jerry White, Bob Ochinko, Sammy Stewart, John Ellis, Mike Sadek, and a stick of gum. We got plenty of time. Anyway, Glenn Adams, Rick Camp, Rick Sutcliffe. If we can do this within an hour, I'd be happy. But if we can do this within 30 minutes, which we're probably not going to be able to, I'd be ecstatic. Ted Cox, Bobby Maddock, Joe Nolan, Paul Mitchell, Tippy Martinez, Steve Kemp, Steve Garvey, Jeff Zahn, Gary Ronicky, Jim Lentine, Doug DeCensis, John Montifusco, George Brett, Johnny Bench, and a stick of gum. Jerry Royster, Bobby Bonds, Luis Gomez, Gorman Thomas, Willie Stargell, Joaquin Andujar, Matt Keogh, Jerry Martin, John Grubb, Joe Simpson, Mike Norris, Bob Nepper, Robin Yount, Roger Erickson, Checklist, George Riley, Rich Gossage, Brett Burns, and a stick of gum. Dan Petrie, Mike Schmidt, Dennis Walling, Andre Thornton, Buck Martinez, Bob Owachinko, Mike Heath, Jerry Turner, Mike Sadek, Mike Hargrove, Danny Ainge, Bert Hooton, Larry Milbourne, Doyle Alexander, Bruce Bochy, Del Unser, Leo Sutherland, Ivan DeJesus, and a stick of gum. Larry Gura, Ron Say, Carly Yastrzemski, Hall of Famer, Rusty Kuntz, John Tudor, Mark Fidrich, Bill Russell, Willie Wilson, Ben Ogilvy, Dave Rader, Gary Carter, Hall of Famer, Joe Strain, Terry Whitfield, back-to-back Giants, Ron Davis, Frank LaCourte, Bobby Mercer, Neil Allen, Paul Splittorff. Oh, I forgot that L. I thought it was Spittorff this entire time. Sorry, Paul Splittorff. Scott Sanderson, Jim Kern, Dennis Kinney, Larry Cox, Don Ossie, Al Bumbry, Sal Bando, Cesar Geronimo, Jim Palmer, Jamie Quirk, Mark Belanger, Mike Phillips, Mookie Wilson, Larry Parrish, Duffy Dyer, Rick Burleson, Bob Baylor, and a stick of gum. Next up, we have George Brett, Doug Corbett, Larry Lavelle, no, Gary Lavelle, Steve Stone, Jamie Quirk, Fred Stanley, Bob Piccolo, UL Washington, Ted Simmons, Hall of Famer, Johnny Bench, Hall of Famer, Pete Rose, oh, not a Hall of Famer, but he could have been, Doug DeCensis, Ted Cox, Sparky Anderson, I think he's in the Hall of Fame, Alan Ashby, Ed Farmer, Bill Russell, Dick Ruthven, and a stick of gum. Next up, we got Terry Kennedy, Butch Hobson, Jim Kern, Jorge Orta, Steve Stone, Larry Sorensen, Jim Lentine, Ken Reitz, Len Sakata, Bob Watson, scored the 1 millionth run, John Wathen, Mickey Hatcher, Joe Strain, Lonnie Smith, Bill Buckner, George Frazier, Champ Summers, Paul Spit, no, it was Spitorf the entire time. The stick of gum. Pack reps have been shameful. Mark Clear, Steve Garvey, John Milner, Terry Whitfield, Tommy John, Sparky Anderson, Glenn Borgman, Bob Lacey, Dave Rozema, Fred Norman, Joaquin Andujar, Mark Fidrich, Carl Yastrzemski, Dave Frost, Milt Wilcox, Bob Rogers, Mike Phillips, Larry Bradford, and a stick of gum. Pete Rose, Len Sakata, Carlos Lezcano, Rick Camp, Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Famer, Larry Boa, Bob Walk, Craig Reynolds, Ernie Witt, Pat Putnam, Ed Halicki, Ken Reitz, Bake McBride, Al Raboski, Lonnie Smith, Dave Vrajic, John Tudor, Ross Baumgarten, and a stick of gum. Probably opened close to 20 packs. Bobby Bonds, Johnny Bench, Hall of Famer, Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Famer, Del Unser, Rick Cerrone, Vern Rule, Mitchell Page, Jim Rice, Hall of Famer, Fred Stanley, Thad Bosley, Clint Hurdle, Bruce Bochy, Rich Wortham, Eddie Solomon, Steve Rogers misprint, Dave Palmer, Al Oliver, Gary Allenson, and a stick of gum. Steve McCaddy, John Castino, John Grubb, Lou Whitaker, Johnny Bench, Jorge Orta, Bob Welch, Yogi Berra, Jim Bibby, Fred Norman, Ross Baumgarten, Mike Jorgensen, Sparky Lyle, Pat Kelly, Dave Concepcion, Larry Milbourne, Carlton Fisk, Hall of Famer, John Candelaria, and a stick of gum. Jim Fregosi, Stan Poppy, Reggie Smith, Bill Madlock, Terry Crawley, Pete Rose, Don Sutton, Hall of Famer, Billy Martin, Hall of Famer, G. Hebner, Phil Niekro, Hall of Famer, Gary Allenson, Steve Yeager, Steve Kemp, Lamar Johnson, Reggie Jackson, Hall of Famer, Jim Tracy, Steve Garvey, Lynn McLaughlin, Don Stanhouse, Ron LaFleur, Mickey Rivers, Jim Palmer, Bruce Bochy, Dennis Lamp, Jim Beattie, Tom Verzier, Mike Davis, George Hendrick, Chet Lemon, Juan Beniquez, Gary Alexander, Paul Spitorf, Bob Ochinko, Yogi Berra, Bobby Maddock, Bob Pate, and Stick of Gum. Crazy enough right there. We have surpassed the 30-minute mark. George Hendrick, checklist: Wayne Garland, Glenn Abbott, Mike Jorgensen, Don Baylor, Willie Aikens, Bill Lee, Ray Knight, Vern Rule, Johnny Bench, Hall of Famer, and not a Hall of Famer. Tommaso Garcia, John Littlefield, Jerry Augustine, Bob Lacey, Glenn Borgman, and a stick of gum. George Brett, John Littlefield, Glenn Borgman, Dan Dressine, Ken Landro, Bert Blyleven, Hall of Famer, Mike Davis, Ricky Peters, Mario Soto, Birch Winiger, Gary Ward, Toby Hurrah, Brett Burns, Rick Sofield, Andre Dawson, Hall of Famer, Art Howe, Bob Stanley, Willie Hernandez, and a stick of gum. Bo Diaz, Preston Hanna, Roger Erickson, Joey McLaughlin, Alan Ashby, Rick Burleson, Richie Zisk, Jim Rice, Hall of Famer, Joe Turry, Hall of Famer, Jeff Cox, Pete LeCoq, Al Woods. Al Woods. That name sounds familiar. Oh yeah, I remember it. He's the D lineman. Larry Hernan, Bert Hooton, John Wathen, Bob Piccolo, corrected error. Rich Wortham, Brian Downing, Steve Nikosha, Jim Morris, Terry Pule, Victor Cruz, Baumgarten, then McClure, then Pete Rose, then Paul Householder, then Roy Smalley, Enrique Romo, Bobby Maddock, Ricky Peters, Frank White, Ben Ogilvy, Duffy Dyer, Win Rimmersall, and a stick of gum. Bruce Benedict, Lance Parrish, Jim Norris, Jim Fry, Benny Ayala, Juan Beniquez, Bobby O. Chico, Ed Ott, Pat Kelly, Rick Sofield, Dan Quisenberry, Joe Morgan, Ron Davis, Ted Cox, Paul Mirabella, Gary Templeton, Broderick Perkins, Richie Hebner, and a stick of gum. Tony Bernazard, Raphael Landestoy, Raleigh Fingers, Joe Necro, Robin Yount, Tom Hossman, Clint Hurdle, Matt Coe, Champ Summers, Gary Alexander, Daryl Jackson, Ken Singleton, Dan Ford, Greg Yells, Bill Madlock, Tim Blackwell, Dwayne Kuiper, and a stick of gum. Gary Templeton, Don Robinson, Rodney Craig, Mike Squires, Jim Fregosi, Jeff Zahn, misspell, Jim Essien, Bill North, Steve Dillard, Joey McLaughlin, Doug DeSenses, Bruce Benedict, Gaylord Perry, Hall of Famer, Steve Garvey, Glenn Adams, Jerry Martin, John Ellis, Rich Dower, and a stick of gum. Jim Rice, Hall of Famer, Bobby Castillo, Bobby Bonds, Gaylord Perry, Hall of Famer, Ken Landro, Jeff Zahn, misspelled, Bert Campaneris, Rick Sutcliffe, Victor Cruz, Cecil Cooper, Checklist, Danny Darwin, Gary Alexander, Carlos Lascada, Jim Dwyer, Milt May, John Candelaria, Mario Soto, and a stick of gum. Rick Matula, Steve Stone, Ed Halicki, Jerry Remy, Dale Barra, Dave Steeb, Willie Randolph, Rick Dempsey, Win Remersall, Scott McGregor, Jim Palmer, Bob Nepper, Sal Bando, Champ Summers, Dave Concepcion, Danny Goodwin, Bob Piccolo, corrected. No, wait, that's an error. Mike Easler, and a stick of gum. Tug McGraw, really good name. Joe Strain, Andy Hassler, Steve Garvey, Pete Rose, Ed Whitson, Dennis Martinez, Bruce Bachty, Rick Dempsey, Rich Gale, Rick Honeycutt, Jerry Martin, Rich Wortham, Joe Amalfianto, Carney Lansford, Tom Bergmeyer, Bake McBride, Jamie Quirk, and a stick of gum. Joe Amalfitano, Dallas Green, Reggie Jackson, Hall of Famer Julio Cruz, Mike Lacoste, Cecil Cooper, Ron Jackson, Bob Boone, Sal Butera, Jerry Mumphrey, Tom Underwood, Rupert Jones, Steve Yeager, Rick Waits, Charlie LeBrant, Butch Hobson, Ken Oberkfell, Freddie Patek or Paddock, Bill Verdon, Denny Walling, Tommy Lasorda, Ken Macha, got me, Ray Knight, Reggie Jackson, Hall of Famer, Bob Watson, Terry Kennedy, Dan Graham, Glenn Hubbard, Dusty Baker, Daryl Jackson, Sparky Lyle, Jerry Kuzman, Daryl Palmer, Dave Palmer, Marty Patton, Amos Otis, Nolan Ryan, Hall of Famer, and a stick of gum. Steve Mura, Clint Hurdle, Jeff Burrows, Fred Lynn, Hall of Famer, Dick Knowles, Luis Pujols, Daryl Thomas, Bob Boone, Bob Rogers, Tommy John, John Walkenfuss, Randy Moffett, Mike Sadek, Rob Wilfong, Glenn Borgman, Reggie Smith, Jerry Narron, Chris Knapp, and a stick of gum. Bill North, Tom Bergmeyer, Barry Bonnell, Mark Fidrich, Richie Hebner, Bill Castro, Pat Kelly, Joe Ferguson, Bob Ochinkno, Ray Burris, Champ Summers, Dave Roberts, Checklist, Rick Dempsey, Bob Boone, Dane Ayerg, Scott Sanderson, Chris Chambliss, and a stick of gum. Jim Ganter, Don Robinson, Mike Edwards, Tom Paciorek, Paul Splittorff, Gary Templeton, Andre Thornton, John Montefusco, Gene Garber, Randy Lurch, Tom Seaver, Jim Beattie, Tug McGraw, Steve McCaddy, Rodney Scott, Vita Blue, George Riley, Greg Minton, and a stick of gum. Vita Blue, Vern Rule, Steve Garvey, Joe Charbonneau, Jeff Newman, Doc Medic, Dave McKay, Randy Lurch, Mike Davis, Carlton Fisk, Hall of Famer, Lonnie Smith, Gary Alexander, Paul Mitchell, Rudy Law, Dave Heaverlow, Butch Hobson, John Wathen, Bob Welch, and a stick of gum. Ross Mulcahy, Alfredo Griffin, Mark Clear, Gary Lavelle, Barry Bonds, Eddie Solomon, Dickie Knowles, Larry Herndon, Ed Halicki, Dick Ruthin, Marty Patton, Jerry White, Wayne Nordhagen, The Checklist, Rick Dempsey, Wayne Gross, Gary Matthews, Bob Auchinko, and a stick of gum. Mike Caldwell, Bob Lacey, Jesus Figueroa, Andy Hassler, Bob Baylor, Tom Donahue, Mark Clear, Bob Auchinko, Bucky Dent, Bill Gullickson, Rick Manning, Jeff Cox, Bobby Clark, Mike Proley, John Grubb, Elliot Maddox, Dave Smith, Dennis Worth, and a stick of gum. Dick Knowles, Tony Scott, Sal Butera, Jim Palmer, a checklist of 81 donruss, Damaso Garcia, UL Washington, Paul Mitchell, Joe Amalfitano, Ken Reese, Willie Wilson, Rob Piccolo era, Carly Yastrzemski, he's a Hall of Famer, Gary Tomasin, Dick Drago, Don Money, Roy Jackson, Louise Tiant, Hall of Famer, I think, and the stick of gum. Larry Herndon, Reggie Cleveland, Pete Vukovich, Mario Mendoza, Champ Summers, Eddie Murray, Hall of Famer, Bert Campaneris, Shane Raleigh, Craig Swan, Jerry Mumphrey, Manny Sanguillen, Dave Stapleton, Steve Howe, Steve Rogers, misspelled, Joaquin Andujar, Ron Hassey, Bill Castro, Tom Hossman, and a stick of gum. You know, guys, this could take, I don't know, maybe 10 more minutes, or if it does come to this, I could split this into two parts. If it's like three, if it takes me five, if it takes me 5 or more hours, I'm definitely going to split this into two parts. But I think if it's less than that, I can manage to do it. If it's only like an hour or two, then I'll definitely going to make this only one video. Craig Reynolds, George Fraser, Mark Wagner, Vern Rule, Brian Asselstein, Buddy Bell, Fred Len, Hall of Famer, John Fulgham, Dan Ford, Willie Norwood, Doyle Alexander, Larry Bradford, Win Rimmersall, Jeff Leonard, Terry Pule, Don Boone, Joel Youngblood, Dwayne Kuiper, misprint, and a stick of gum. Rich Wortham, Robin Yount, Hall of Famer, Mark Little, Reggie Cleveland, Mike Caldwell, Kevin Bell, Oscar Gamble, Carl Yastrzemski, Fred Stanley, Len Sakata, Ivan DeJesus, Luis Tiant, Bob Rogers, Gary Alexander, Willie Hernandez, Mark Belanger, Al Woods, Andre Dawson, and a stick of gum. Here we go, we're at it again. Ivan DeJesus, Luis Tiant, Bob Rogers, Gary. Wait, no, this is a pack we already did. For next Rip-a-Pack, Scott Thompson, Bill Buckner, another Cub, Fred Paytek, Al Cohens, Del Anson, Joe Rudy, Bill Lee, Dave Smith, Danny Goodwin, Sal Bando, Steve Garvey, Bill Castro, Cy Young, Steve Carlton, he's staring into my soul. Ah! Checklist. Dwayne Kuiper, corrected. Rob Wilfung, Tim Blackwell, and a stick of gum. Tippy Martinez, Ed Whitson, John Wathen, John Grubb, Tommy John, Steve Yeager, Joe Morgan, Dave Edwards, Tony Perez, Joe Torre, George Frazier, Joaquin Andujar, Ron Say, Rick Honeycutt, Bob Nepper, Bobby Clark, Toby Hurrah, Mike Heath, and a stick of gum. Tom Seaver, Bill Travers, Joel Youngblood, Bill North, John Verhoeven, Mark Little, Tom Brookins, Dick Williams, Manny Sangolin, Bob Rivera, Steve Henderson, Broderick Perkins, Kevin Bell, Checklist, Enrique Romo, Ken Griffey, John Ellis, Craig Swan, and a stick of gum. John Urea, Dave Garcia, Dave Bergman, Jesus Figueroa, Ron Davis, Johnny Lemaster, Jim Catt, Jerry Remy, Jim Fragosi, Bruce Sutter, Victor Cruz, Bob Horner, Denny Walling, Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, Bob Davis, Steve Rogers, misspelled, Dick Ruthven, Dave Chalk, and a stick of gum. Our next pack, Jeff Zahn, misspelled, Steven Nikosha, Rick Honeycutt, Jim Morrison, Rick Sofield, Gary Templeton, Rusty Kuntz, Hoskin Powell, Paul Mitchell, Jerry Kuzman, Denny Walling, Dave Rozema, Gary Alexander, Jerry Royce, Pat Kelly, Tony Armas, Dick Davis, Paul Molitor, Hall of Famer, and a stick of gum. Bill Stein, Steve Garvey, Steve Rogers, correct. Joaquin Andujar, Bobby Mercer, Mike Lacoste, Reggie Jackson, Hall of Famer, Dusty Baker, Vern Rule, Dave Bergman, Checklist, Jerry Dubzinski, Dwayne Murphy, Daryl Porter, Steve Macko, Ray Burris, Dave Winfield, Hall of Famer, Bobby Bonds, and a stick of gum. Well, since we're nearing the hour mark, I would like to remind you to please like and subscribe to see future events like these. I would usually post this NFL Superfan 112, but I ran out of video ideas for Stan the Man. Or the man not named Stan. Jim Fregosi, John Milner, Dwayne Murphy, Tim Stoddard, John Ellis, Steve Mura, Tom Donahue, Al Woods, Willie Stargell, Hall of Famer, Carl Yastrzemski, Hall of Famer, Jerry Royster, Jeff Burrows, Bob Horner, 3 straight Braves, 4 straight NL East. That'll break the stretch. 2 straight AL. Oh man, there was a lot of NL East in that pack, especially Mets and Braves. Daryl Porter, Scott McGregor, Larry Milbourne, Dave Roberts, Carlton Fisk, Jim Dwyer, Dave McKay, Jim Beattie, Mark Clear, Reggie Cleveland, Nelson Norman, Jeff Burrows, Oscar Gamble, Jen Lentine, Bill Verdon, John Matlack, Gary Maddox, Bob Owachinko, and a stick of gum. Dick Tidrow, Rob Dressler, Ed Halicki, Jim Wolford, Roy Howell, Rich Wortham, Andre Dawson, Hall of Famer, Leon Roberts, Willie Stargell, Hall of Famer, Mark Wagner, Lou Piniella, Jack Clark, Mickey Rivers, Bob Baylor, Larry Isle, Jerry White, Bobby Maddock, Bump Willis, and a stick of gum. Bobby Brown, Bob Horner, Bill Russell, George Brett, Hall of Famer, Dave Lemanzik, Al Cohens, Moose Haas, Mario Mendoza, Dave Steeb, John Lemaster, Larry Isle, again, Jeff Reardon, Marty Patton, Rob Dressler, Bruce Bachty, Bobby Cox, Don Ossie, Pete Falcone, and a stick of gum. Otto Velez, Craig Reynolds, Gary Ward, Doug Corbett, Joe Torre, Mike Proley, Tony Scott, Tom Donahue, Fergie Jenkins, Hall of Famer, Steve Carlton, Hall of Famer, Tony Bernazard. Break that Hall of Fame streak. Tom Buskey, John Grubb, Jerry White, Mike Schmidt, Hall of Famer, Eddie Murray, Hall of Famer. Oh, man. Don Money, Ray Burris, and a stick of gum. Whenever there's a streak of Hall of Famers, I always think that Tim Raines will be at the very end. Tom Donahue, Mike Torres, Mike Davis, Tim Blackwell, John Walkenfuss, Toby Hara, Greg Nettles, Jason Thompson, Chris Knapp, Roy Jackson, Bruce Bochy, Mark Little, Bob Pate, Omar Moreno, Randy Lurch, Cecil Cooper, Ken Forsch, Larry Isle, and a stick of gum. Al Bunbury, Alan Trammell, Pat Zachary, Dusty Baker, Burnt Campaneris, Tom Hossman, Jerry Naron, Joe Charbonneau, Carney Lansford, Bobby Castillo, Dennis Littlejohn, Broderick Perkins, Joe Negro, Bump Willis, Juan Benitez, Denny Walling, Mike Phillips, Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, and a stick of gum. Leo Sutherland, Mookie Wilson, Dwayne Kuiper, spelled wrong, Lynn McLaughlin, Larry Hernan, Tommy Lasorda, Glenn Abbott, Dave Roberts, Eddie Halicki, Ron Say, Tom Donahue, Paul Spidorf, Bo Diaz, Jim Wolford, Bruce Bochy, George Foster, Mike Norris, Bob Alchinko, and a stick of gum. Okay, you were saying? I can't. I can't. I literally. I said that I will not stop recording this video until I pull a Tim Raines rookie. Is this a different pack? Leo Sutherland, Mookie Wilson, Dwayne Kuiper spelled. No, this is the same pack. Okay. Junior Kennedy, Mark Belanger, Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, Lynn McLaughlin, Bake McBride, Bob Shirley, Burt Hooton, Doug Capilla, Scott McGregor, Bob Nepper, Ricky Peters, Mickey Klutz, Ron LaFleur, Jerry Mumphrey, Dave Heaverlo, Dave Chalk, Lance Parrish, Tom Seaver, Hall of Famer, and a stick of gum. Wayne Garland, Jim Lentine, Tom Donahue, Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Famer, Scott Sanderson, Roy Jackson, Tippy Martinez, Red Schuenis, Elias Sosa, Sid Munge, Barry Bonnell, Dave Ponnell, Raleigh Fingers, Woody Fryman, Pat Underwood, Mark Wagner, Ed Halicki, a checklist, and a stick of gum. Dan Petrie, Bob Davis, Keith Hernandez, Gary Maddox, Bill Verdon, Keith Moreland, Steve Rogers spelled right, Tom Hossman, Bruce Benedict, Len Barker, Cecil Cooper, Jim Ganter, Al Rabowski, Ivan DeJesus, Rodney Scott, Bucky Dent, Carlos Lezcano, Mike Squires, and a stick of gum. Have Ray Burris, Rick Honeycutt, Enrique Romo, Luis Tiant, Vern Rule, Marty Patton, Mike Ivey, Glenn Hubbard, Jim Sundberg, John Urea, Bill Castro, Shane Raleigh, a checklist, Billy Martin Hall of Famer, Dennis Littlejohn, Jim Spencer, Tom Hossman, Steve Garvey, and a stick of gum. What did you want to tell me, Dad? Go, we got Woody Fryman, Bob Walk, Danny Ainge, Tony Scott, Billy Sample, Dan Graham, Sammy Stewart, Rob Dressler, Gary Maddox, Mike Lacoste, Jerry Kuzman, Carney Lansford, Jerry Garvin, Gary Matthews, Don Baylor, Vern Rule, Tommy Hutton, Sal Bando, and a stick of gum. Richie Zisk. Oh, look at that dog sweater. Don Muddy, Burnt Campaneris, Mike Norris, Ed Ott, Dan Dressing, Willie Wilson, Joe Rudy, Ricky Peters, Gary Templeton, Robin Yount, Hall of Famer, Ken Singleton, Steve Macko, Mark Wagner, Jose Morales, Mike Edwards, John Tamargo, Dennis Leonard, and a stick of gum. Randy Jones, Dave Rozema, Duffy Dwyer, Dan Petrie, Bob McClure, Preston Hanna, Sandy Stewart, Dave Bristol, Tom Bergmeyer, Britt Burns, Steve Rogers, Dave McKay, Otto Velez, Mookie Wilson, Greg Gross, Jim Spencer, Mike Phillips, Len Cicada, and a stick of gum. Dane Iwerg, Billy Martin, John Castino, Elias Sosa, Harry Spillman, Dave Edwards, Freddie Patek, Kent Tekulve, Earl Weaver, Tim Corcoran, Mike Cubbage, Randy Lurch, Dick Ruthven, Greg Minton, Jim Wolford, Jim Spencer, Ken Griffey, Glenn Hubbard, and a stick of gum. Mike Lacoste, Jerry Martin, Billy Sample, Gary Allenson, Bucky Dent, Ron Jackson, Byron McLaughlin, Clint Hurdle, Dennis Kenny, Glenn Scott Abbott, Ron Guidry, Steve Renko, Frank LaCourte, Buck Martinez, Larry Gura, Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, Dave McKay, Joaquin Andujar, and a stick of gum. Raphael Landestoy, Mike Vale, Gene Tennis, Ray Burris, Steve McCaddy, Tommy Boggs, Nolan Ryan, Hall of Famer, Ernie Witt, Dale Murphy, Hall of Famer, Bruce Sutter, Hall of Famer, Steve Garvey, Willie Ankins, Jack Morris, Hall of Famer, Alan Trammell, Hall of Famer, Neil Allen, Joe Ferguson, Craig Reynolds, Gary Allenson, and a stick of gum. Come on, man. Dovey Dyer, Tim Stoddard, Frank Tanana, Willie Cox, no, Larry Sargel, no, Larry Cox, Willie Sargel, Hall of Famer, Dan Petrie, Cesar Geronimo, Gene Garber, Mike Ivey, Lance Parrish, Bert Campaneris, Keith Smith, Billy Sample, Al Cohens, Tommy Hutton, Bruce Sutter, Dennis Walling, John Ellis, and a stick of gum. Fred Paytek, Dwight Evans, Dave Roberts, Jerry Remy, Bill Travers, a Cy Young from Stevie Stone, Jason Thompson, Steve Rogers, John Mayberry, Don Stanhouse, Mickey Klutz, Del Unser, Bush Hobson, Bob Shirley, Sal Butera, Dave Chalk, Paul Spidorf, Jeff Reardon, and a stick of gum. Let me go check. Let's see how long. 14 minutes and 40. Okay, so I'm not even halfway yet. Joe Charbonneau, Woody Fryman, Dave Lopes, Art Howe, Rob Piccolo, Steve McCaddy, Bob Shirley, Larry Bradford, Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Famer, Danny Goodwin, Gary Lucas, Checklist, Mark Wagner, Gorman Thomas, Del Alston, Joe Rudy, Rick Matola, Jerry Martin, and a stick of gum. Pete Vukovich, Hal McRae, Larry Bradford, Al Oliver, Bruce Bochy, Jay Johnstone, Jamie Quirk, Dave Parker, Gary Templeton, Al Roboski, Terry Crowley, Pete Redfern, John Tamargo, Buck Martinez, Bill Fahey, Mike Flanagan, Richie Zisk, Don Sutton Hall of Famer, and a stick of gum. Dennis Kenny, Al Roboski, Johnny Bench Hall of Famer, Billy Sample, Roy Jackson, Roger Erickson, Butch Weiniger, Al Halicki, Jerry Turner, Lee Mazzilli, Doug Bear, Dan Schatzsteeder, and Jerry Martin, Daryl Porter, Joe Nolan, Tom Donahue, John Lowenstein, Jerry White, and a stick of gum. Dan Dressing, Danny Ainge, Bob Piccolo, Tom Bergmeyer, John Tudor, Bobby Bonds, Miguel Delone, Tom Paciorek, Checklist, Mike Davis, Steve Rogers, Carney Lansford, Bob Lacey, Greg Minton, Carlton Fisk Hall of Famer, Hal McRae, Frank Tanana, Gene Tennis, and a stick of gum. Joel Youngblood, George Fraser, Gary Ward, Ron Oyster, Roger Erickson, Mario Mendoza, Bob Forsch, Tom Hossman, Tom Seaver, Hall of Famer, Rick Burleson, Bump Willis, Alan Trammell, Hall of Famer, Sal Butera, Paul Molitor, Hall of Famer, Don Stanhouse, Woody Fryman, Rick Bazzetti, John Matlack, and a stick of gum. Bill North, Tommy Hutton, Mark Belanger, Bill Fahey, Tony Perez, Raleigh Fingers Hall of Famer, Bob Stanley, Doug Bear, Bump Willis, Mike Phillips, Britt Burns, Tom Seaver Hall of Famer, Clint Hurdle, Pete Falcone, Bill Castro, Scott Thompson, Dave Stapleton, Jerry Mumphrey, and a stick of gum. Doyle Alexander, Bob Forsch, Randy Jones, Pete Rose, Jerry Turner, Brian Kingman, Rick Monday, Ed Whitson, Carl Yastrzemski, Hall of Famer, Doug DeSantis, Mark Little, Andy Hassler, Ron Say, Gene Tennis, Rick Matola, Broderick Perkins, Scott Sanderson, Gary Alexander, and a stick of gum. Still yearning for that Tim Raines rookie. Dennis Walling, Willie Randolph, Craig Swan. Oh, that's a cool card. Glenn Adams, Tom Underwood, Ron Say, Checklist, Cesar Geronimo, Champ Summers, Tom Donahue, Jerry Martin, Willie Norwood, Frank Tavares, Paul Householder, John Gorel, Ray Burris, Jerry Garvin, and a stick of gum. Jim Morrison, Dave Bergman, Dan Graham, George Hendrick, Tom Donahue. I feel it. I feel it. This is gonna be the one. Oh no, it isn't. Hal Roboski. I feel it. This is gonna be the one. Gary Carter. Oh man, that was an Expos Hall of Famer at the very least. I don't know if that's Tim Raines in the picture. Kind of looks like Andre Dawson. Oscar Gamble, Marvis Foley, Nolan Ryan Hall of Famer, Gary Matthews, Bill Russell, Tony Scott, Mike Proley, Ken Griffey, Tony Bernazard. Oh man, that looks exactly like him. Tom Donahue, Dick Williams, and a stick of gum. Have Jerry Turner, John Fulgham, Del Olson, Jim Palmer Hall of Famer, Jeff Leonard, Terry Crawley, Craig Reynolds, Mookie Wilson, Mark Wagner, Bake McBride, Rudy Law, Paul Mitchell, Carl Yastrzemski, John Ellis, Joey McLaughlin, Darryl Thomas, Frank Tavares, Jim Sundberg, and a stick of gum. Tom Bergmeyer, Mike Proley, Dave Edwards, Jim Spencer, Omar Moreno, Dwayne Kuiper, misspelled, Buddy Bell, Dave Bristol, Jeff Leonard, Vern Rule, Jerry Augustine, Joe Amalfitano, Don Ossie, Charlie Lieberant, Barry Bonnell, Cesar Geronimo, Ken Landreau, Mario Soto, and a stick of gum. Charlie Moore, Jerry Martin, Hal McRae, Jackson Todd, Freddie Patek, Broderick Perkins, Glenn Adams, Bill Castro. Checklist. Watch this. I'm going to do this next one with my eyes. Oh man, that was Bob Nepper. Watch this. This next one is going to be it. Nope, that's Hoskin Powell and then Ozzie Smith. Did I miss one? No, it was Checklist, then Bob Nepper, then Hoskin. Okay, Andre Dawson. Dang it. Oh my god, he's in the exact same position, and he's also a Hall of Famer. Jack Morris, Hall of Famer. Skip Lockwood, Tug McGraw, Tom Hossman, and a stick of gum. Bob Davis, Robin Yount, Hall of Famer. Jim Rice, Hall of Famer. Dave Roberts. Glenn Abbott, Woody Fryman, Jerry Koosman, Phil Niekro, Hall of Famer. Ken Oberkfell, Gary Ward, Pete Vukovich, Dwayne Kuiper misspelled, Doug Capilla, Reggie Jackson, Hall of Famer. Sid Munge, Roy Smalley, Rudy Law, Leon Roberts, and a stick of gum. Stick of gum. John Matlack with the perfect face. Don Robinson, Scott Thompson, Luis Pujols. Checklist, Cesar Geronimo, Dave Concepcion, Tom Verzer. Oh man, Warren Cromartie. Come on, man, you can't fool me like that. Dave Kingman, Tom Houseman, Dickie Knowles, Jim Morris, Bob Welsh, John Walkenfuss, Craig Reynolds, Jay Johnstone, Ernie Witt, and a stick. John Matlack, Bert Hooton, Jerry Mumphrey, Andy Hassler, Mitchell Page, Mike Cubbage, Joaquin Anwar, Jim Dwyer, Paul Splittorff, Al Cohen's on Money, Mike Easler, Mark Fidrich, Larry Isle again, Barry Bonnell, Johnny Bench Hall of Famer, Jose Morales, Bump Willis, and a stick of gum. Well, guys, Doing this. Oh, Jim Noir. Paul Splittorff. Al Cohen. Is this just the same pack? Don Money. Mike Easley. Yeah, this is just the same pack. Okay. Mark Little. Willie Stargell, Hall of Famer. Jack Morris, Hall of Famer. Glenn Adams. Bruce Bochy. Steve Macko. Gary Ward. Mark Clear. Lou Piniella. Dale Murphy. Daryl Jackson. Scott Sanderson. Joe Strain. Tom Seaver, Hall of Famer. Jerry Kuzman. Rick Monday. Dick Tidrow. Ken Landreau. And, you already know. John Camargo, Wayne Nordhagen, Wally Fingers, Reggie Smith, Rennie Stennett, Byron McLaughlin, Doug DeSensis, Pat Putnam, Bob Owachenko, Paul Splittorff, Brian Asselstein, Jerry Kuzman, Greg Nett, Rob Wilfung, Dave Lemanzik, Tim Blackwell, Tom Brookins, Dave Edwards, and a stick o' gum. Bump Willis, Keith Smith, Thad Bosley, Dickie Knowles, Jim Essian. See, this is proof that it's spying on me. Don Stanhouse, Gary Matthews, Mike Squires. Okay, this is complete proof that it's spying on me. This is 100,000% proof. Jeff Zahn, misspelled, Neil Allen, Dave Edwards, Mike Norris, Dale Murphy, Ray Burrs, Ken Reitz, Al Bumbry, Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Famer, Dick Drago, and a stick of gum. Leon Roberts, Ron Davis, Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, Cecil Cooper, Sal Bando, Tony Armas, Bruce Bochy, Jack Morris, Hall of Famer, Dave Stapleton, Jim Morrison, Tom Griffin, Darrell Porter, Don Sandhouse, Jamie Quirk, Mike Norris, Rick Matula, Joe Ferguson, Steve Yeager, and a stick of gum. Mike Davis, Ray Burrs, Dwayne Murphy, Kevin Bell, Alfredo Griffin, Gary Carter, Hall of Famer, Dan Meyer, Checklist, Jamie Quirk, Danny Ainge, Jason Thompson, Checklist, Tom Buski, Jerry Augustine, Elias Sosa, UL Washington, Reggie Smith, Joe Ferguson, and a stick of gum. Woody Fryman, Joe Nolan, Doug Bear, Juan Beniquez, Robin Yount, Joe Rudy, Lance Parrish, Bill Cottle,